years. I left after or during the Second Intifada, 2002. I'm also in the, I was chairwoman of Jewish Voice for Just Peace in the Middle East. Now I belong to the general committee of this organization. And I work also as a psychoanalyst in Berlin. I was invited, and I'm grateful for that, to speak about the Mizrachi struggle. Since I left Israel, my English is a bit suffering because I had to learn German. So if I will need some help, I hope I can get it from all of you. And I was also very curious about this project of yours. Therefore, I'm also thankful because I had the chance also to deal with this concept. And I thought unlearning Zionism. As a psychologist, of course, that unlearning or learning is something that makes me very curious. In psychology, we deal a lot with learning curves, how people learn. And actually, trainers know that it's much easier to learn, to teach something, and to learn something new. It's much more hard to unlearn something, because it means that we learn something, we internalize something, and we have to change it. And it's a very long process. Of course, as a psychoanalyst, this is my daily thing, and I know how long and how hard it is. Also, as a former Zionist, I know how hard it is, because I'm coming from a, like most Israelis, I'm coming from a very Zionist family, which is normal. And it is a very hard and painful process to unlearn it, because it means, and Berlin is full of such Israelis, not only Berlin, I see also faces here from other places in the world of Israelis that I know. It means sometimes also a disconnect or something very destructive that happens in our own families. The inability to speak with our parents, with our friends. We lose oft many contacts because it's a very threatening idea in Israel not to be a Zionist. It means actually to be a traitor. So therefore, I'm also happy to take part in this, because it, of course, helps also me in this process. And actually, we are talking about a process. It's not that we reach this promised land at some point. It's more, you know, going in the desert and seeking for answers, and looking back and looking ahead, and going through despair and also happy moments, because it made me also meet many people that enriched my world, which I never could met otherwise. So this is about unlearning. And Zionism is also something very complicated, because what is Zionism? When I was in the school, and I went through the Israeli education system, it means, yeah, Zionism. Zionist was someone who was a Jew that came to Israel. That was the definition of being Zionist. And today it's something totally different. Zionists today are Christians mainly, who do not live in Israel, who support Israel from far away, who thinks that or believes that Jews should do some work for them. It's not by chance, I think, that Zionism developed to such an idea, because the core idea of Zionism is a Protestant idea, actually. And it's not by chance that the big Zionists today are Protestants, or people that were evangelicals, or people that were raised in this tradition. Because Zionism talks about, let's go to the land, to the Bible. And I was also an officer in the Israeli army, so I used to teach also these ideas of this is the place where we Jews belong to. According to the Bible, it was here and here, and now we are back. So mythology became to history, to kind of science. It's Protestant in the way we relate to work, for example, the moral ethics of work, the working class, and this idea, it's something Protestantic. And it's based also on the idea that Jews are not normal unless they have their own country, which is actually an anti-Semitic idea. The Jews are not normal people. So it's also a relief to be a non-Zionist, because for me, at least, it means to be more Jewish, in a sense of not being connected to land, but to the idea. And that was actually what Jews brought as for relatedness to the text or to the Torah, as the place where you feel at home. And with this, you can take it with you everywhere and be at home. Like, for example, for many of us, we have a political home that we can take with us or create one. So that's the part of Zionism. Now, for me, the moment of not being Zionist is related also to my identity, which was heavily neglected or denied, I would say, more than neglected, denied as a Mizrachi Jew. And I started to deal with the Mizrachi struggle and to try to understand how it came. And Meir Ariel, that's for the ones who don't know him, is an Israeli songwriter. And he wrote once a song, and at the end he says there is a phrase that says, בסוף כל שיר ישראלי, I think, יושב ערבי עם נרגילה. That means at the end of every song in Hebrew, there is an Arabic, in that sense, Palestinian man sitting and smoking shisha. So I think this is also what I discovered when I started to deal with it. So I'll try to take you to a short excursion in this Mizrachi struggle through the generations of it, and I'll try to focus on the last generation and actual events. So we start with the first generation of people that came from Muslim and Arabic countries. Most of them did not come. After Israel was established, they were brought to Israel. There was a plan to bring them, and it was a default plan, because actually during the Nakba, 1947-48, more than 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from Israel because they were Arabic. And to have a Jewish state, the idea was that the Jews need a land and they need also to be the majority. So in order to be a majority, you have to transfer people. So Palestinians were expelled, Jews came, and after the Second World War, all the Jews that could come came, and nobody wanted to come to Israel if they didn't have these motives as Zionist. Most of Jews were not Zionist. Only 3% of the Jews before the war were Zionist. So European Jews preferred to go to Australia, to South Africa, to England, to the USA if they could. So the Zionist leader decided there is no choice, we have to bring Jews, and the only Jews left are Jews in Muslim and Arabic countries, which were considered to be inferior. That was a colonialist idea and also a racist idea that they import from Europe, like Zionism itself. It's a national idea that was imported from Europe. So there was no choice but to bring these second-class Jews, and they were also designated to be second-class Jews. We have also to remember that the Ashkenazi leader came from Poland, from Germany, which is a classical class society, and Jews from Arabic countries, I will call them now Mizrachi Jews. These are the sociological definition from all these Jews that came from non-European countries, they were designated to be this working class. And it was also written in all the protocols. It's not something very new, which I tell you. Now, the first generation that was brought to Israel, these were people, most of them were Moroccans, because in Morocco there was the largest population of Jews. They already realized on the way to Israel, on the boat, how they were treated. So, for example, David Ben Harush, which was a Moroccan Jew that came with a ship to Israel, already on that ship he saw how he was treated by the people that brought this group of Jews from Morocco, which were all Ashkenazis, because these were the Jews at that time in Israel. And they were, for example, he and his family and many others were put were housed in Palestinian places, in Palestinian houses and neighborhoods. And the idea was, for example, that Wadi Salib, which is a neighborhood in Haifa, where the Palestinians were expelled from, the Jews from Morocco, they know how it is, and they know it from the Medina and from the Mlach and their neighborhoods, and they will get along in these houses. So they were put there. So actually, they were the one that inherited the Palestinians as for the place, but of course, without any conditions to work there or to have any possibility to live a dignified life. So they start to rebel. And this rebel, for example, was framed in Israel as riots, as without any motivation, people that are just frustrated. They are animals, as we know, all these Arabs, and they cannot control their feelings and so on. So they just rebel, and they were drunk. So it started actually as in a fight. Someone drunk was shot by the police in one of these neighborhoods. And Ben Gurion, that was at that time as a prime minister and also the mayor of Haifa at that time, were suppressing this rebellion all along Israel, because actually it started in Haifa, but it spreaded all over Israel. Already in Beersheba, for example, which is in the south, riots began and rebellion began with an agenda. I mean, these people that rebel had clear demands to the government. What do they need? What do they want? It was a social, actually, fight for better conditions, housing, work, and so on. And we have to remember also, many of these Jews lived also in camps. We call it in Hebrew, it's sometimes said that it's ma'abarot. It's kind of transitional housing. But we have to remember these Jews lived in such camps. These camps had fences. The army was all over. Their passports were confiscated, so they couldn't go anywhere, actually. And as part of their rebellion, they called also the king of Morocco, "We want you to take us back." Now, this is, of course, something very threatening for the Jewish Ashkenazi leaders. That was not the plan. Yeah? And it was also suppressed heavily, and David Ben Harush was jailed for many years. He got supported only from the Communist Party at that time. Now, I'll skip, I'm doing it very shortly, to the second generation of the rebellions, which is actually the children of the people that were born in Morocco. Some of them were born themselves in Morocco, but they already grew up in these slums, I will call it. These are Palestinian neighborhoods without any infrastructures. They couldn't go to school. Many of them had to go to work in order to support their parents. There was a lot of criminality in these neighborhoods. Now, we have also to remember that these Jews, when they came from Arabic and Muslim countries, they were better educated than Jews that came from European countries. Most of them came from countries that were colonialized by England or by France, and they had a good education. So they spoke much more languages, they were better educated, they could do much more than they did, actually. And that was planned also, yeah? They were put also in these slums or in other places that were far away from the center of Israel, with no infrastructure and possibility to work. So now we are talking about the organization of these children of the first wave of migration from Muslim and Arabic countries, and actually youth that grew up in the streets. And they knew also how to deal with the police. But they started to organize, especially in Jerusalem. It started in Musrara, that's a neighborhood that was a Palestinian neighborhood, of course, and close to the border at 67. So this was a place where Mizrachis lived, because they were also in the front line of the fire from Jordan. One can see also until today pictures of these blocks and houses where there is a wall and holes for the shooting. The soldiers were standing on the roofs and shot back to the Jordanian part. So they organized themselves with the help of the Communist Party that had their place where they just offer them, you know, to come in the afternoon and to play a bit and all that, and start to talk with them and to organize them. And that was the beginning of the Black Panther movement in Israel. We are talking about the children of the first generation that was also heavily suppressed by the Israeli government in many levels. So first of all, they were double agents that were implanted in this organization and were working for the government. Now, we have to understand, they demanded actually also social demands. I mean, welfare, they were the one that introduced the, what we call in German, Kindergeld, how do you say it? I mean, a welfare money for the children, for example, that you get for every child, and it was also progressive at that time, today not anymore in Israel. That were their demands. They wanted more, I mean, a place where they can live, accessibility to education, to work, normal things that people want in order to live properly. But they also have demands that they say we need equality. Equality in Israel is a big threat, because the basic idea of Jewish, it means there is no equality between Jews and Muslims, mainly Muslims or Palestinians. The idea is that this is a Jewish state and Jews have here privileges. So it means, for example, that if someone is born as a Jew or his grandparent is a Jew, he's able to come to Israel automatically, and a Palestinian that was born in Israel, in Palestine or afterwards Israel, can be expelled also now, yeah, and to become non-citizen, for example. So these demands, and the fact we are talking about Arabs, that in that case Jews, that have demands, is something which is very threatening for the idea of a Jewish state. And we have also to remember that if we look in the population of Israel, the majority of the people that live in between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea are Arabs. Jewish Arabs, Muslim Arabs, and Christians Arabs. So the Europeans, the white, so-called white, I mean, in Europe, of course, Jews are not white, but in Israel, they become white, the Ashkenazis. They are actually the minority. So if Arabs will communicate with one another, then the Ashkenazi will be also the minority. And they tried all the time to split between Jews from Arab countries and Muslims successfully, unfortunately. And part of this splitting was to let them fight about these the little resources that they were given. So if, for example, we give, if there's a family and we give one child more than the other one is going to get, then of course we can in this way cause much more envy and rivalry, and we can split and avoid solidarity or suppress any solidarity. So this is the second wave. The Black Panthers really mobilized thousands of people that came to Jerusalem to demonstrate. And although the police was heavily suppresses them, really with a lot of violence, they could manage that also because they knew how to deal with the police. They are criminal. They grew in the streets, yeah. So they were beaten, and horses were smashing them, and they were jailed, and it wasn't easy for them. But they could organize. This rebellion was totally suppressed after the government established a competitive organization. They call it Black Panthers Blue-White, of course, which was founded by one of the Doppel agents. And they took from them and was subsidized and supported also financially by the Shabak, the security service in Israel. And they got in the election the missing votes, so that the Black Panther Party could not enter into the parliament. And then came the October War, Yom Kippur War, which was the end of this protest. Now, the third generation, we are talking about the grandchildren of these people. These are the people that tried to do it more in politics and were also despaired, so they established a political power like Shas, that there is a political party that was in the beginning non-Zionist party, and after suppression that I will not go now into it, became a very Zionist and also right-wing party. Now we are talking about the next generation, which is the fourth generation. I think this is the actual part which is interesting, because there is also, it starts now with a group in the north of Israel, in Bet Shan, which is a development city, place where Mizrachis were brought to also without infrastructure and work, and a place which is not very developed. And nearby always there were, and there are still many kibbutzim, which are today not really kibbutzim because they were privatized. But they got in the beginning, after the Nakba, after Palestinians were expelled, the people from all the agricultural parts of the Israeli society, which are the minority, of course, the Israeli society, they got the land. So more than 80% of the land in Israel belongs to them. And the idea was that all the Palestinians that were expelled and left their property behind, if they do not claim it until this and this year, it belongs to the country, to Israel. So this was a way to confiscate the land. And it was given to kibbutzim mainly, which means they also got the natural resources in Israel. So for example, if we're talking about Hermon, which is the only mountain in Israel where you have here and there snow and you can ski with 2 lifts, it belongs to one small Zidlung or settlement, yeah? And they have all the rights to operate it, and they have the money also from that. Or there were some inns where you can take water from, it belongs to one kibbutz. And now near this Bet Shan, which is actually Bisan, it's a Palestinian, it was a Palestinian city that was destroyed. There are also some rivers there that belongs now to a kibbutz. And these people from the young people, this 4th generation of Mizrachi youngs from Bet Shan said, we want to go into this kibbutz and to swim also in this river that they have there in this kibbutz. This kibbutz says, no, we have a business here. We live from that. It's our house. We rent here rooms and we live from tourism. It belongs to us. We were here in the beginning. We were here first. So you're not allowed to go there. Now, this is a very interesting struggle because it touches the core of the problematic of Zionism, because Zionism means we take the land without the people. We need as much more Jews as we can. And the idea is to avoid that the Palestinian will claim their rights, which they deserve. I mean, it's their homes, it's their lands. They were expelled. Nobody argues that they were expelled. And the Mizrachis were supposed to be actually thankful to the Ashkenazim who brought them to the promised land and to the high culture, supposedly, that they got there, and not have any demands. Now, these young people, they say, we want to enjoy, and it has to be open for everybody. Which means if it's open to everybody, it's open also for Palestinians, which is exactly not the idea of having a gated community. Gated communities in Israel are designed to exclude actually Palestinians, Bedouins. Usually it's not said clearly. You just said, okay, we are building now a neighborhood for people that were in the army. That's the code word to say it's not for Arabs. Or you open, you have a settlement and it has its gated and all that. You let all Bedouins come during the day because they work there, they clean the place, they build the houses. But in the evening, you have, you close the fence, you don't let them in. And in your swimming pool, for example, you don't say it's not for Bedouins or not for people from around. You say it's only for people that live in this city, small city, let's say, yeah, which is also the code word of it's not for Arabs, because if I will live there and I will bring someone as a guest that doesn't live there, of course they will let me in and my guest in. So now there is a big question. I mean, this is a struggle that is raising lots of emotion in Israel because it's threatening. We are talking now about the Palestinians that sits at the end of this song, of this river, and is waiting now because Palestinians are not taking part in this struggle. And also in this struggle, there are the people that struggle, they say we're not oppressed people. We are educated. We know what's going on. We learned, we went to university. We just want our rights. It's not something about we didn't get something else, but they also talking in the language of the master. They say, we were also in the army, which makes them different, of course, from the Palestinians, because if we buy rights, if the right to climb on a mountain or to get into a swimming pool or to get on a bus is bought through army service, it means it's only for Jews. So now I think it's a big question. How is it going to develop this struggle? And we can see also how this struggle is splitting. I mean, also people that will say, I mean, I'm for equality, and I think that all people should have access to all nature resources and whatever, and I'm against gated community. Suddenly they feel, actually, that they are threatened, because if we'll start to talk about equality in Israel, it's going to be the end of Jewish state as we know it as a Zionist idea. And I think that's the hot area that people try to avoid, but this is also the essence of the Mizrachi struggle. It shows how dangerous it is and why is it so suppressed. Yeah, so I think, yeah, I'll stop here. Yeah, I hope it wasn't too much. And,
thank you, Iris, very much for trying to do the impossible and in 30 minutes give us such a wide spectrum on topics that are connected to this. So first of all, thank you. And yes, these are very hard things for some of us to learn. or to go through. So this is why it's important for us to create this space in which we do this together, and learn, understand, and teach ourselves new things. Before I go to the chat, which is wonderfully filling up, which is very great, I would like to ask you if you could give a short input on why this is not common knowledge for us if we grew up as Jews in Israel. And then I will take questions from the chat. And as I wrote, I will do my best to include as many questions as possible. We have about 25 minutes.
Yeah. Well, it's not common knowledge because this is part of the idea of the suppression. Mizrachi Jews were actually expelled from their history, not only from territory. So we are talking, like, for example, when we are talking about Jews that came from former Soviet Union, they considered in Israel to be Russians. They are all Russians. In Germany, for example, we meet people from Belarus, from Ukraine, from Russia, from Uzbekistan. So people have history and geography. And also Morocco is just, they're all kind of Arabs, Mizrachis, we are all Jews. But Jews from Yemen have really almost nothing in common with Jews from Morocco besides the religion, but culturally it's very different, of course. So we know very little about it because it's not taught in the school. There is a famous work of Meir Gal. It calls 9 out of 400 or something like that. He holds a book like that. Now it's not a book, just he holds it like that, and you see a book of a history book, and only 9 pages of this book are dedicated to history of Jews from Arab countries and Muslim countries. So this is the way also to create the new man. This is also the Zionist idea. The Zionist idea is we start here anew. This is the Jew that was newly born. And it means also that we have to negate the life in the diaspora outside Israel, because this life has no value. And now we have to start from the beginning, and we were born all like Venus from the waves in the sea, and we can start now and be one people, kind of. So yeah, this is the Zionist idea, actually.
Thank you. Okay, first question is a direct one to which country your parents came from, if you wish to answer that. If not, we go to the next one.
Yeah, I prefer to go to the next one. It's not a secret. I can tell you why, because I'm working as a psychoanalyst, and I know that it's recorded, and then my patient look at it and all that. So I prefer not to. It's important for therapy. It's a problem that they know too much.
Being
so,
private.
I mean, if I know why it is important, maybe I can try to.
Next, here's a comment in Hebrew from the citat of Miriel's song. A question: could you maybe recommend books in English that document Mizrachi struggle and related historic events?
Mm-hmm.
Here, following that, are a few recommendations. So that's lovely. If you have a recommendation that you want to throw in before I go to the next question.
I think the most important book, and you can find it in English, is the book of Professor Sami Shalom Shitrit, The Mizrachi Struggle. It was translated to English, and it's a good start.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Sami Shalom Shitrit. Yeah.
Question. I'm a Jew from the US, have studied with founders of Black Lives Matter movement, and I hear a lot of parallels, but this is the first time I've actually heard about the Mizrachi struggle. Do you know if there are links or collaboration amongst these movements?
Yeah, there is a group, IJAN, International Jewish Anti-Zionists, something like that. They have connections to Panthers, and of course the Black Panthers in Israel took their name from the Black Panthers in the USA, which was also a big threat. And of course there is a similarity to Black Lives Matter. These are movements that try to create solidarity between minorities, non-whites that are suppressed because they are non-whites. And the idea is to split among them. So there are a connection, of course, and also Jewish Voice of Peace in the USA. They have also groups of POC, Jews that are POC, and they also wrote some declaration in this issue.
Thank you. Also for having answers to all the questions, which is not always obvious. So I see there are some links of recommendations towards the question on the collaborations or cooperations between different movements. Okay, just to say, I guess this is a comment, that in the present day social justice movements in the US, there is sympathy with Palestinians and an assumption that all Israelis are the same, and a lazy assumption that most US Jews support the Israeli government. If you wish to say something on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that this idea that all Jews are the same, of course, I feel uneasy to hear that, yeah, because we are very diverse and we are not all the same. On the other hand, if you are born in Israel and you are raised in this way, in a Zionist way, it's very hard not to become a Zionist. And I see it also with also with friends, and we see it also with our families, how they get drifted. And also Orthodox that were really anti-Zionist in the beginning, Orthodox Jews, that becomes more and more Zionistic because it's very hard to live in a place and not to identify with it. I can say it also as a Jew living in Germany. Yeah, I mean, at some point, yeah, you live here, you get something good from the place, or you identify with the place, your children go to the school there and whatever. So at some point, and if you will look also in polls during wars and whatever, there is a high identification of the Jews that lives in Israel with their government and what the government is doing, and no separation, but it's also part of the psychic of the Israeli society. We're talking about society with no borders, not only geographically. So the border between civil life and army life is disrupted. I mean, people are going 1 month in a year to the army. So it's not that we have a civil society and a military society, it's intertwined. So in that sense, yeah, Jews in Israel are highly identified with their government, and there is no difference between the government and the person. I mean, we were also indoctrinated like that. I mean, for example, you have to imagine, as a youth or as a 20 years old, when I flied to somewhere else and I took a flight of El Al, then on the airplane, it's written, Israeli, you have to remember you're the ambassador of your country when you're abroad. So we were all raised to be soldiers from kindergarten, ambassadors after we were in the army, and it's hard to get rid of this role and to understand that there are ambassadors and they get paid for that and they work for the government, and we are private people.
Where would you say that today is the biggest gap between Ashkenazis and Mizrachis in Israeli society, besides the examples you mentioned about natural resources?
Mm-hmm. I think the gap is in the possibility to move. And we see it now, for example, during Corona times. It's really, you can really see this split. So most of Ashkenazis have the possibility to move either because they have other passports, for example, Polish or Ungarish or German and whatever, that enables them to go to European Union, for example, or they are better educated, which means that they can move because they are wanted, they are better qualified. And now it's a bit different because Portugal gave Jews from Mizrachi origin, actually, the possibility to get a Portuguese passport, which is now, I mean, a big chance for many Jews, Mizrachi Jews, but still, if you're not educated, and it's not that easy. So I think this is it's about resources which are not only financial, it's also what we call symbolic or capital or the education, such possibilities to move.
Yeah, the right of return to Portugal is we should do a lecture on that. Another one, maybe. Is it true that those Palestinians who remained were helping the Mizrachim to integrate in Israel?
Well, I mean, it's a big question. What do we mean when we say to integrate in Israel? And what do we mean by helping? Of course, there were social connection, and this is also the threat for the Ashkenazi leaders of the country, because both spoke Arabic, both coming from same areas, for example. And until 1967, we have also to remember, there were only the Palestinians within Israel. And for the Mizrachis, it was a big chance also that the occupation, that the West Jordan and Gaza were occupied, because until 1967, the Mizrachis were in the bottom of the Israeli society, a bit above the Palestinians, of course, but there are not many Israeli Palestinians. And after 1967, the Mizrachis could be the employers of workers from the West Bank and Gaza that came to Israel to work. Mizrachis could talk with them. In that sense, Palestinians helped the Mizrachis to integrate or to mobilize themselves a bit higher in the Israeli society, in this hierarchy. But
what we call class jumping, maybe.
Pardon?
Something between the connection between class and racism and class jumping, I guess.
Yeah. At the expense of the Palestinians, of course, until the first Intifada, second Intifada. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm running quickly to try to get as many as possible. Also, do you see some parallels between the Druzim and the Mizrachim?
There are some parallels in that sense. The Druze were also splitted a bit from the Palestinians. They are different class, and also they got privileges, if you can call it a privilege, but it's like the Mizrachis. So they can go to the army. They are allowed to. They are getting this possibility. And in order, they have to be thankful to be part of the Israeli society and to serve the master and the agenda of the master. But of course, it's a very problematic role, because the moment you're not doing that, then you are dangerous. Then you have to be oppressed and suppressed, and it proves actually that you are a doppel agent. So this is the role of the Mizrachis. They are there, but they are Arabs. So they are very suspect in that sense. So I think in this, there is some common lines.
From Hebrew, איך את רואה את המאבק של הקהילה האתיופית בהקשר של נושא השיחה הערב? How do you see relation to the Ethiopian Jewish struggle in Israel? I assume in Israel, but also of the Ethiopian Jews, maybe not in Israel.
Yeah. I think there is, of course, a connection, because Ethiopians were brought to Israel after a long struggle. They wanted to come much before, and they were also treated suspiciously. They were considered to be non-Jews. They had to be baptized already in Ethiopia in order to be allowed to come to Israel. And they were heavily suppressed in that 50% of their women were castrated. Also during the waiting in the camps, until they were allowed to come to Israel, the people that brought them forced them to take contraceptives, which calls Provera. This is an implantat, a subcutaneous implantat, in order to avoid pregnancies. And afterwards, 50% of them could not have children. In that time, parallel to that, millions of white, for Israel they are white, former Soviet Union people are allowed to come into Israel. A third of them are non-Jews, and nobody cares, and nobody is saying there is a problem that you are not Jews. So of course, they were brought because they were white in order to strengthen the white minority. And Ethiopian Jews were brought, okay, I mean, at some point, Israel had to do that and also selected them like Mizrachis were selected, and they are heavily oppressed and suppressed in Israel. So they are suffering from police violence, I mean, in the school they are oppressed. The chances for them to mobilize in the Israeli society is much harder. And there are cooperations also between Mizrachi activists and activists from Ethiopian community. But of course, it's very hard. I mean, they went through all the things that Mizrachi Jews went through. Also, I mean, segregation. They were put in kibbutzim. They went through day education in that sense that they were splitted from their families. I mean, criminality is higher in this society, which was not the case before. So I think on that ground, there is a basis, of course, for cooperation, because it's the same and worse for the Ethiopians, I guess.
Somehow related, I'm going to connect two questions now. Are the current movements of Palestinians and Mizrachi Jews working together towards liberation and justice? So are there? And also the next question, where do you see, from someone else, where do you see that Mizrachim and Palestinians can find common ground in the struggle against white supremacy / racism in Israel, especially with many Mizrachim and Palestinians having a lot of internalized racism and so-called self-hate, where they want to become part of the Upper Ashkenazi community? These are just observations, but I hope my question is clear, especially when it comes to Palestinians choosing to join the IDF, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think today the cooperation between Mizrachis and Palestinians are not abandoned. I mean, cooperation at all, let's say, yeah, are very rare. For Mizrachis, of course, it's much more dangerous because they are anyhow being suspected to be traitors. So for them, they have to overcome much more. In addition, and that has to do also with the second question, with the internalized racism. It's not only that Mizrachis internalize this racism, they are operating like the Druze for the agenda of the Ashkenazis. It means that, for example, there is an abuse of Mizrachi identity and skills in order to split also for them. And it means in each one of us, and also as a collective. So for example, the soldiers that are acting as double agents in West Bank, for example, are Mizrachis. They can speak Arabic and they know Arabic and they can move there freely, let's say. And many soldiers also that are doing policing missions in the West Bank are Mizrachis. It means that people, I mean, Mizrachi people are shooting and executing people that could be their father, brother, whatever. I mean, it means that if we think about it psychically, it means that one part of me will kill the other part. This is something that every one of us, and I could say it also for myself. Yeah, I used to work in hospitals. Every morning when I got into the hospital, I was stopped in the checkpoint, and I had to say good morning to the man that stopped me in the gate. And that was the code word that he knew I'm a Jew, because I said good morning in an accent of an Ashkenazi, which is the accent I learned in Israel where I grew up. And that was enough. But actually what I said in the subtext, I told him, I'm not Arab, let me go, let me pass. That was the way to get into, this is also the way to get into Israeli society, to have mobilization, to be educated and to have the chances like I got. So what we have to do as Mizrachis is actually daily to deny and to negate our Arabic part. all the time, all over and all over. And we have to keep actually in our mind, we have to imagine that, yeah, that in one part of my mind, I have to keep it that I'm Israeli and Jew and whatever, and on the other part that I'm Arab. So when this part is active, the other part should be muted. And when they will come together, it can cause a lot of fear or confusion or things that we would like to avoid. And I think this is the trap where Mizrachis are. We are talking about fourth generation of Mizrachis and internalization through this time and generation that is now really strong. So Mizrachis has much more to lose actually if they will cooperate with Palestinians, because Ashkenazis, they can move, yeah? Most of Israelis, for example, in Berlin are Ashkenazis. Most of the money got out of Israel into Berlin to buy places for these people to live, for example, from their parents that have also this money. So they have kind of security. Mizrachis will stay in Israel. They have nowhere to go. This is also, of course, a motivation to do something with it and to cooperate with Palestinians, but the fear, what will happen to them if they will not stand on the gates of this gated community that Israel bought there is of course, is enormous high. Yeah.
Could you throw a few names or a name of some corporation, historical, if not from now, like Keshet or?
Yeah. I mean, there were many corporations belonging mainly to during the 90s, there were many Mizrahi intellectuals like Professor Ella Habiba Shochat from the NYU now, Sami Shalom Shitrit, Tzvi Bet-Dor from the NYU, Moshe Behar today in Manchester, and activists from Black Panther. There were movements like East to the Peace, and they met Palestinians, for example, in Toledo. There was a big meeting. Also, Toledo was chosen as the place where the golden age of Jews under Muslim, like Maimonides, Rambam, that was active there. The Jews had this prosperity under Muslim culture and dominance. So these are just some examples.
So I see there are many questions. I can't even go down so quickly, and I'm trying to be fair and do it by order. So there's a comment here, and I think then afterwards 1 or 2 more questions. The comment says, the vast majority of so-called Mizrachi have been gone through Israelization and are denying own roots, anti-Arab. I think some of these things you've also actually just touched. And part of Zionist system. The critiques are no more than 1% and work in academies, etc. They have no influence in Israel, and the Ashkenazim completely control the education system and related Israeli institutes. I'm Arab Jew myself, and I saw very few references, if at all, to this pic. One can look in politics, Shas party, army, etc. They are all Israelized. Hence, there will be no cooperation, unfortunately, with Palestinians. It's just a dream. We continue to a question. Please, of course, if you want to say something, always you're allowed to.
I agree.
The tension between, okay, this is a recommendation. Okay, new question. Many North African Jews were placed in my hometown of Accra, Akko, and we lived side by side and they felt at home. Maybe it's also important to speak about pre and after 1948, if you could say something about that, as well as, and then we take one more question about the title of this evening. So please.
Yeah. Indeed, they lived together. There are still some mixed cities in Israel. Accra is one of them. Ramle is one of them. Haifa is one of them. But these are the exceptions. Most of the places are highly segregated. So the first time I met people, I met Palestinians really was when I was in Berlin. Yeah. So yeah, I think in 1948 is indeed a date which is important because it means that Palestinians were expelled, and on their places like Bisan, for example, where this river that I'm talking about, El Asi, is located, and this is the case also in many other cities. Afterwards, the houses of the expelled Palestinians were in the beginning not really wanted. So Mizrachis got them. But after, for example, 67, when East Jerusalem was occupied, and these houses were not on the border, then they were bought. I mean, these Mizrachis were expelled from that by government programs, Pinui vePitzui. They were expelled to the territories, to the West Bank, and Ashkenazis got these houses, these nice Arabic houses that they could renovate, and they live there.
Thank you. So last question for this evening, and then we'll wrap it up. Could you say more about the question in the title, or do you already have a conclusion for us after this very intense but very fascinating, interesting time we spent together about Mizrachi politics, resistance, decolonization?
No. Well, I think it's an open question as for this river, El Asi. Yeah, it's a struggle about the right, actually a human right, to have an access to swim in a river. It's nothing. Yeah, but if you look, I mean, the people that read Hebrew also, they see how people argue when they are saying, well, why Mizrachis cannot get into there? So in many kibbutzim, for example, they have fences and they have a big checkpoint, kind of, and sometimes it's written on that loud music is not allowed for, especially not music of darbukas. This is the Arabic drums, yeah? So it's clear that Arabs are bringing their non-culture, unlike the European culture, which we know. I mean, we are speaking from Germany. We know something about European culture also in that aspect. So there is, I mean, the racism that in this colonial idea that we have here native people or wild people that are full of, these hot traits that we are talking about them in psychology. I mean, they are driven by their emotions and no rationality and whatever, and they will bring here, they will contaminate the river. So the arguments where they are going to leave here garbage, they are going to be loud, they are going to destroy the nature. So it's the usual actually aspect or argumentation of we have to defend ourselves in our villa in the jungle that we build here from these wild people who are actually the natives. And now the question is how much they will dare, the people that are active there, how much they will dare to go and to say it's going. I mean, we want this struggle and we want all these places to be open, all the natural resources open to all the people that live here. If that is going to happen, it's a revolution in Israel. Yeah, because it means that the power of the Ashkenazi institutions, and they have a lot of power, they get this land, which is the precious resource in Israel. It's a small country, where this is the struggle. The struggle is about land and education. The political struggle. So it depends how much they are going to master the language of the master and to use it, and how much they are going to risk also their privileges, because it means that if we are all going to share this place, it's actually the idea of one state, and this is a revolution. Let's see. Therefore, I said, from the river to let's see. How far can you, I'm not that optimistic. Yeah, otherwise I probably would be still in Israel, but there is a potential in that struggle, and therefore it's so dangerous and hot topic.